Okay, welcome back. I will start ringing the bell so more people come in. Everybody's enjoying still their coffees and snacks. Nice to have you back here. I'm again reminding you about tonight's party. Are you seeing the location? All right, will you be there?
Yes, sure.
Of course. All right, so the next panel is merger between the traditional Sprechen Sie Deutsch panel, which is the German-speaking market session, and now it's going to be merged with the Scandinavian territories, probably much more to talk about rather than the loom and gloom that Germany and Austria are facing right now. But of course we have the best moderator in the house, Dr. Joerg Hofmann, who is passing on his legacy as a moderator to his son, who is also here. He's been going to moderate another panel in the other room. So I will not take further time away from this session. Good to go.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, and good morning to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here again. The best moderator in the house, probably there's no other moderator available at the moment, and I think I can accept it. It's a very nice introduction. Today, the Nordics meet the DH and not really CH regions, so that means it's the Nordics and it's Germany, Austria. And that means it's Morten and it's Gustav and it's Arthur and it's Joerg meeting together and discussing what's going on in our jurisdictions and beyond, across the border. We're not only covering those countries where we live, where we have our businesses, but also interesting neighboring countries. And first of all, later we'll just discuss what's going on in Finland, which is most interesting. For years, if not for decades, this was the monopoly state across the European Union, and if bets were taken, will they ever change? Probably the odds will be, or would have been critical. We will see what's going on there. But let me first introduce you to my panelists. I'll do it in the order that are seated. We have Gustav Hofstedt. Gustav is the General Secretary of the, let me check, it's the Swedish Trade Association for Online Gambling. And we have someone similar who is in a similar position as the CEO of the Danish Online Gambling Association. That's Morten Ronding, who is the CEO of this trade association, and also a founding partner, managing partner of Nordic Gambling, which is a law firm that covers all the Nordic states. And also, if we go back into the past, decades, 100 years maybe, you served as a regulator in Denmark. You were the author of the famous Danish model, which was then a piece of an example for a functioning regulation in Europe. That was around 2010, in this year's kind of years? Okay, so 100 years ago. and Arthur Stadler, founding partner of Stadler Völker in Austria, in Vienna. A very loyal speaker on Zoltan's conferences, so we're doing this a couple of times, we've done it. Austria is interesting too, because there's a new government, and hard to give an outlook of what's going on in the near future. My name is Joerg Hofmann. I'm a German gaming lawyer, was partner with Melchis in Heidelberg in Germany, and this year I'm practicing gaming law for 30 years. I hope I look younger than these vintage in my passport, but we will see. Starting with Austria, Arthur, if you could let us know what's going on, what's the impact of the new government? I remember I've been to Vienna in January. There was a very interesting summit at the university. We're dealing with European Union law, the impact of the European Court of Justice on regulation in Austria, in Germany. And someone representing the regulator in Austria said, we're going to change. I'm going to replace the monopoly by way of a licensing regime within maybe next 3 or 5 years. And then a few weeks later, there was the elections, and probably things are completely different. And then we had changes in the market. Brands were taken over by other big brands from abroad. Just share your insights with us and we're happy.
I don't know where to start. Sorry, does it work? I mean, factual changes, and jumping on that, we've seen that the major land-based betting operator is being taken over from Novomatic, the Admiral brand, what you're mentioning, is to be bought by Tipico, which is a major overhaul of the market. Yeah? There's a big player now And that changes a lot for the market, factually, yeah. But legally speaking, I'm a lawyer, and I can, okay, comment on factual changes. Legal changes, we had 3 approaches to get the government in Austria, and finally we got one, the first 3-party coalition in Austria. And within the coalition agreement, they were saying, well, we are evolving, we think about the monopoly. And many read it as an overhaul of the Austrian monopoly. I really doubt, because I know the Austrian psychedelic situation. Going to Austria, right now the regulatory situation is we have a gambling monopoly offline. The casinos are held in the hands of Casinos Austria, 12 offline land-based casinos, which is de facto monopoly, but you can even award these 12 casinos to different applicants. Yeah? These licenses are going to run out and expire by end of 2027. So we need, within the next 2 years, a new licensing regime. We need applications, and we need a new gambling authority. That's also in the coalition agreement, but that takes time. And as we know, licensing proceedings take also time. They are sure to be challenged. That's lawyers' business, obviously. Yeah, we have operators applying for it. Other competitors are going to challenge these procedures, and that will take time, more than 1 year or 2 years. So we are in a very narrow time frame. In Austria, actually, to be honest, we don't know if that's feasible to have the licenses awarded until the end of 2027, and new licensing regime, a new licensee taking over, if that really works. That's in the land-based business. In the online business, we also have the online monopoly on casino games. But funny enough, the betting business is a very liberal business. So there's no limitation in numbers. Betting is totally different. As said, a psychedelic and schizophrenic situation, as the Austrians, we're the land of Sigmund Freud. We say, okay, betting is liberalized, you get a license whenever you approach the authority. There are 9 authorities for every provinces, and funny enough, no limitation in numbers. But the limitation number, 1 applicant only for casino. Yeah? And the burden is everybody wants to offer, obviously, also casino products. The Austrian monopoly online has a coverage of covering the market of around 40%. The rest is operators from not with an Austrian license. Says a lot about the Austrian monopoly. And the real burden is not to get fined by the regulator, but the real obstacle and real challenge is that there are player claims and players getting their money back. If you go to court and saying I've lost my money, with operators not having a national license. So that's the main challenge. On the side of the operators is obviously the Bill 55. Many operators are offering from Malta. Austrian rulings are currently not enforced in Malta. We'll see if that changes in the near future. The player claims side are creative enough. There are many lawyers and many supporting entities. It's like an industry with a kind of insurance company financing the proceedings. And they were targeting the directors of these operators. And currently there are pending rulings or pending proceedings at the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg.
Right, so we can say that Austria is the new Finland in Europe, right?
Yes, in a way. But and funny enough, the new government obviously needs money, as every government, and the budget needs money. And currently, just recently, 1st of April, they raised the amounts for betting tax. The betting tax was okay, was attractive enough, from 2% in the past. Now it raised to 5% tax on turnover for the betting, for the gambling, for 40% GGR, which is a lot already. up to 45% each year.
Right. I will get back to you
that's
later.
not as attractive anymore.
No, of
Austria
course.
used to be a very attractive market.
Taxation kills the industry in some jurisdictions. I think it's a topic we can touch on later as well. I will get back to you later during our discussions and focus on these player claims, which is an international issue in some countries, including that Bill 55, or as they call it now, the Article 56A of the Maltese Gambling Act. If you're not familiar with it, we'll explain it later. But have a look to the Nordics first. Maybe we can start with Sweden. Gustav, your association represents around 20 operators, gaming operators, providers. This gives you a very good overview of developments, not only in Sweden, in various markets, because many of those are cross-border operating. Can you give us some insight on the development and how your members appreciate it or not appreciate it?
Of course, Joerg, and thanks for inviting me to this discussion. By the way, you still look young and beautiful. I just want to stress that.
Made my day, thank you very much.
So Sweden re-regulated its market in 2019. The population size is an equivalent to Austria, approximately 10 million or so. And the market, unlike Austria, is quite liberal. Everything except land-based casino and lotteries are included in a competitive market since 2019. So any operator out there can apply for a license to offer, for example, online poker, online casino, sports betting in other areas, etc., etc. The result, well, I can also mention, as I said, we are a population of approximately 10 million. The average money spent on gambling is approximately 1% of our disposable income in Sweden. And being a jurisdiction with a fairly high GDP per capita, it gives us some 300-400 euro annually on every Swede. And in total, that should give us some 3 billion euro or so annually. So, of course, a jurisdiction much smaller compared to Germany, but way larger than Denmark, for example, due to our size. And Sweden is a fairly well-functioning gambling market, not best in class. You will listen to a representative from Europe's best-in-class jurisdiction in 3 minutes or so. But a constant challenge in a regulated market is, of course, to attract the consumers to the licensed market. And our impact and result is that we have a channelization level of approximately 75%. In other words, 25% of the market is leaking out to the unlicensed market. The unlicensed market with no taxation, no consumer protection, no profitability for the licensed operators. Is that good or bad? Well, the Swedish government set up a goal prior to the re-regulation that Sweden should reach a level of 90% channelization. That is probably quite an ambitious goal. It can be compared to the Netherlands, for example, that set up a goal of 80%. And we have, unfortunately, never reached that channelization goal. And that is a pity, because I believe that it is achievable to do so. And we will soon listen to, once again, a jurisdiction that actually reached that channelization goal. And I mean, when we talk about channelization, it can sometimes sound a bit boring to listen to it. But once again, what it actually means, it is perhaps not a goal by itself, but it's a necessity to achieve consumer protection and tax income for the state and well, legitimacy for the gambling system that the legislators decide upon. So yeah, I also, and then I will take a break. I also want to ask myself, but also the audience, well, is this an attractive market for operators to be in? Yes, I think so. It is true that approximately 70% of the market share belongs to the 5 largest operators out there. But we do see that it changes whether you are big or small on the market. And there is also always room for new incumbents on the market. The competition is really, really hard. But we have seen since 2019, only for the few last 6 years, that operators that from the beginning were really, really small is now among the 10 largest operators in this jurisdiction. So it gives, I believe, a very positive message that your market share is certainly not stable if you maintain curious and hungry and listen to what the consumers demand. It doesn't matter if you are small from the beginning.
You think it's about finding the niche to target a specific audience, or what's the idea of newcomers in the market to be successful?
Well, Sweden decided, as the other Nordic countries, by the way, that are re-regulating their markets, to maintain its governmentally owned operator. And that operator, from the beginning, obviously had a huge chunk of the market share. But in Sweden, as well as in other jurisdictions, state operators, they tend to not be active enough in listening to the demands of the consumers. So what we see is a constant decrease in their market shares, not just in Sweden but elsewhere. And that obviously gives you a great opportunity to find your niche market. And in fact, being niche from the beginning may be what is general a few years after. Leo Vegas, for example, one of the largest operators in Sweden and elsewhere, but it was founded in Sweden. They started with a niche market, namely to offer casino mainly on the phone, on your smartphone. But nowadays, we all know that is the main device to use when you gamble. And I'm quite convinced that I am not an entrepreneur myself, but as long as the legislator and the regulator provide the jurisdiction with a competitive market where everyone is allowed, I certainly believe that that's not the last story. We will see future stories with new entrepreneurs providing the market with innovations that we perhaps not yet have seen.
So happy to monitor this development further. Morten, the Nordic Gambling has offices in almost every major, if not in all, Scandinavian states, jurisdictions. You have the overview from the legal perspective. You're advising your clients, there's your lawyers in every country. How do you assess the development in Sweden first, and then we come to the other countries, and finally touching on Finland, of course. But Sweden, from your point of view as a lawyer, anything to add?
It was a very interesting question, and one we're actually looking into now, because on the face of it, the two countries have adopted very similar regulations. So Sweden, who came on in 2019, was inspired by Denmark and copied almost everything, almost one-to-one, the provisions. But they made some changes that are significant. So they decided not to offer retention bonuses to the players. You can only offer a bonus one time when the players is acquired. On some other areas there were changes too, but not too big. But then you see that the authority who oversees everything is having a completely different approach to regulation, supervising and advising the players and consulting. And that seems to have affected, with the few changes in the regulation, it seems to have affected the market quite a lot. Because and Gustav said in Sweden there's 75% of channelization. In Denmark there's 91. So that's a big gap. So apparently the Danish player has less incentive to play on foreign unlicensed websites than there is in Sweden, and it's very important to look into why that is. But the players, as we know, they're very disloyal. If there's a little incentive to play outside of the licensed system, they will do it. And Gustav said, but who does it benefit? Well, it benefits the players, because the players, they get better prices, they get they get better bonuses, and if the incentive is big enough, they're also ready to take the risk that they know that the gambling operator in Curacao is not protecting them as well as one licensed in Sweden. They also know that in some instances you don't get your money back because they found a way to say, well, you were abusing something, and suddenly your winnings go away. But you're willing to take that risk because the product is better, and that's a problem. And that's where you see a lot of jurisdictions is just lagging behind, because they, for many different reasons, you wanna have national rules. You want to regulate. You want to decide how the product looks like. In Germany, you want to decide that the slot machines, they have to have 5 seconds between each spin. Nobody wants that. None of the players wants that. So when you start touching the product, when you start touching the marketing, the bonuses, and make the product less appealing, then you see that the players, they will find ways to play outside of the legal system.
I think we can conclude in our discussion that the channelization rate is the key indicator for a successful regulation. If it's 91%, I mean, that's sensational. 75 is not bad. In Germany, I think we can estimate our channelization rate around 20% maybe. It's just because the product is not competitive, and that's the point. If the player decides where to play because he's getting better conditions somewhere else outside the markets, he will go, and that's what happens in Germany. As you say, 5 seconds minimum spin duration. The world is with 3 seconds. That's what a player accepts and he demands. And so if it's 5, only few people play. Same with bonuses, limits. High rollers have no chance to spend the money in regulated markets like Germany, because 30,000 euros, one size fits all, is the maximum. But that's an exception for 1% of our players. The standard limit is 1,000 deposit limit. And I could continue listing all these things that makes things different and put the industry in a disadvantaged competitive position. And finally, it's the tax rate. In our country, it's 5% on stakes, also for casino games, which you're not even allowed to call them casino games. You have to call them virtual slots for some legal reasons. Casino games is bank holder games, different licensing regime. And if your tax is going up, you see that players move into different markets because the return to players, the RTP, is going down as well. Otherwise, operators cannot afford it. I think that's something the politicians need to learn and to understand. Only these two aspects, taxation and the competitiveness of the product, decide on the successful regulation. I think that's a good point, and thank you for mentioning it. So we've seen some of your thoughts about Sweden. In your home country, Ireland, there is really a successful regulation. Anything else to add on Denmark, or would you like to introduce us with the new upcomings in Finland?
Well, in Denmark, what is to say is that right now it looks very good. And there's a high challenge, there's a competitive market, there's many things are going well, but there's a lot of political pressure, because what we've seen in Denmark, as in many other countries, is that there's overexposure of gambling adverts in the media, and people hates it. They would have hated it if it was, dishwasher commercials too, but they definitely hate gambling, which prompts the government to do something about it. And and as a trade association, what we're trying to avoid is that they bring out the big hammer, and they take the smaller hammer instead and make some smaller changes. But there's still a risk that that things change, and maybe in 3 years down the line we're at the channeling radars in Sweden.
There are no code of conducts from the industry.
No.
Good work. Everybody's doing better and better and more and more.
Yeah. You mentioned Finland.
Mm-hmm.
Finland is a very appealing market. I think it has a lot of relevance here in the Baltic region because a lot of the operators that are targeting Finland now are established in Estonia. Either they're Estonians or they're actually Finnish people who moved across to Estonia to offer gambling in Finland. So it's a very interesting market. It's one of the few markets left in EU where there's still a monopoly, except for Austria. So there's high expectations, and the regulation looks good. But we also see that they incorporated some of the same mistakes as in Sweden with the bonusing. So there are concerns that it's not becoming as good as you hope, but it looks good. The law is currently in Parliament. Hopefully it's adopted either just before the summer break or right after. Then you have the secondary regulation, which you don't know anything about. And then you start handing in your licenses in 26. And the market formally opens in 27.
That's great. And what happened to the former monopolist? I think it was Puff, right? So you're still being part of the business and now going to compete with private operators?
Yeah, the formal monopoly is called Wakehouse. That's the only one who has been granted a license. Mm-hmm. But you're right, Puff operates under certain conditions in Finland, is allowed to accept bet from Finnish players, but without advertising. I don't know how their position is. Wakehouse position is, I think, good because they've done over time. They've performed very well. They've been very successful, but now they are restricted. So they're losing market shares because they are not allowed today to offer bonuses. There's a lot of games they're not allowed to offer, so they cannot compete either. In a new market, I see that they become a very important operator.
What's the Swedish perspective regarding what goes on in Finland?
Well, it's obviously very positive that all the Nordics more or less understand the importance of offering a non-discriminatory licensing model. My members are obviously very interested in the Finnish market as well. So we certainly look very positively on the developments on the Finnish market. When looking at the details, my colleague in the Finnish Trade Association, Mika, he has been really successful in convincing political stakeholders on withdrawing a number of less clever suggestions that we heard from the beginning, such as a cooling off period. We have experience from that in the Netherlands, and the outcome was not good. Finnish political stakeholders, they realized that when we open up the market, it has to be non-discriminatory, it has to be open for all operators from day one. My concern is that most jurisdictions, including my own, after the re-regulation, start to heavily add new layers of restrictions on the licensed operators. And that is logical from a legislator's point of view, namely to begin with attracting the operators and let them apply for a license and give them a license. But as soon as you have a licensing system, then you squeeze the system. And our task as being trade representatives is to convince the regulator, and even more importantly the government and the parliament, to always safeguard the channelization. The job to safeguard the channelization, it starts when you have re-regulated your market. It's not over when you have re-regulated your market. And that is an important message to Finland, and of course Norway as well, when they eventually re-regulate. May I also add, Joerg, that you said that Sweden's channelization with 75% is fairly good, not least when you
compared to Germany.
Yeah, and I just want to stress, and I know that you agree with me, that it's not an acceptable or a fairly good level, especially if you compare with other expectations that one may have on society. For example, our water supply system. Well, in Sweden, 25% of the water leaks out before it reaches the consumers, or only 75% of Swedish households pay income tax. 25% of it somehow vanishes before the tax authority receives any income. Would that be acceptable?
I'd like to move to Sweden regarding the income tax. That sounds like a good plan. Let's talk about it later. No, nobody would accept it, of course, and I think everything under 90 is not a success, of course. If you imagine how many people are behind these figures, and if you talk about taxation, I guess the Swedish state, so the Danish state, will not be taxing illegal operators, or do they? In Germany, they do. If you are in Austria, same. So if you target customers in Germany and offer your products in Germany without a license, you are illegal. You're not allowed to do anything, but you have to pay taxes. And if they get you, you're in trouble. Is it in your country? Is it the same, or is that tax-free? Another benefit of operators.
I don't know, Morten. What's your take on that?
Well, so in principle, I used to work in the tax ministry, so
you pay your taxes?
Yeah. So in principle, if you're receiving winnings from Curaçao, you have to pay tax. That's taxes that you have to pay, and you have to pay 50% of it.
That's the player.
That's the player.
But I mean the operator.
You don't do that. You try to find them instead, if it's possible, which is never
right,
is.
Right.
But you don't do the German.
Yeah. I can comment on that now. I mean, you shall, as a consumer, you shall pay tax on winnings that come outside from the licensing system. However, no consumer after 6 years have received such tax invoice from the tax authority, and it's obviously the same with grey and black operators, that we don't chase them in practice, and they do not pay tax.
I think it's a normal situation.
May I just use 45 seconds for the lovely jurisdiction of Norway as well? Yeah, super short. But Norway is, as we know, a monopoly right now. But we do have hopes for Norway as well, but it does certainly not look as positive as the developments in Finland. However, Norway is holding a general election this coming autumn. Right now it's a social democratic government, and if that will continue, so will the monopoly. However, there are stakeholders on the center-right wing spectrum of politicians that are working for a change in the Norwegian gambling regulation. But it takes two things. The first thing is a new government in Norway from this coming autumn. And the second thing is that that government, at the end of the day, decides to re-regulate. The two main political parties within that government, Høyre, which is the classical or the traditional center-right-wing political party, have actually decided to safeguard the monopoly, whereas the extreme right political party, the Fremskrittspartiet, have decided to work for a licensing system. And both of those political parties are expected to take seats in a right-wing government in Norway, should the voters decide for such government. And then it will be like a fight between those political parties, whether to stick with the monopoly or abandon it. I know that my colleague in Norway, he's super optimistic. He may be paid to be super optimistic. The rest of us are probably slightly skeptical about a change in the near future, but who knows?
I remember the same discussion, I think in 2013 or 14, there were state elections in Norway, and the coalitions are considering to change, but this is a long time ago and nothing changed, so let's keep that scrutinized and monitored. Very interesting.
I really like the discussion on the channeling rate. I mean, in Austria we have still an ongoing monopoly, and politicians are talking about either fostering or changing the monopoly, but it does not change anything right now on the channeling rate. Yeah? We've seen the monopoly has the license since always, the last 15 years, and talking about the attractive product, the monopoly does not have such an attractive product in order to compete with any other operator. So the rest is the 60% wherever you find them, yeah? And they're in Malta, they're in Curacao, they're all over Europe, and they're paying taxes. That's the ridiculous, again, schizophrenic situation. Yeah? You're not allowed to offer in this market, but if you offer, you're paying taxes. And lawyers turn around this argument and say, well, by the way, we are paying taxes as any other taxpayer. We are trying, what we are expecting, that we are treated in a similar way as all the others. And look at the monopoly. If you're covering only 40%, what kind, I mean, that says enough about the monopoly. And funny enough, we look at Finland, we look at Denmark as a good model and example how to re-regulate. And there is actually ongoing discussion. There is in the back, when at Ministry of Finance or wherever, Ministry of Economics, at closed doors, actually discussing the situation. In Austria, it's a bit more tricky because in the Austrian monopoly as a company, you have shareholders, private shareholders. It's not the state which is owning the monopoly. It's private shareholders, and it's not Novomatic who could not make the run due to dominant position in the market, etc. So it's a major shareholder, which is not favorable for a political discussion in Austria. So Austrian politicians would like to have a consortium, obviously with Austrians, and that's not the case. So we'll see. Austria remains a bit tricky. Either we stay as where we are, in a bit schizophrenic situation also with the monopoly, allowing that it's not, it's just on paper a monopoly, and in reality, well, players go for the attractive product. So in Germany, no?
Of course, yeah, you're right. You want to add something?
Yeah, Jürgen, as you so wisely noted, channelization is how we measure whether a jurisdiction is successful or not. Channelization is the mother of all arguments, because whatever you want to achieve, channelization is key. And the Nordics that Morten and I represent are an interesting environment, since there are some 4 or 5 jurisdictions, and it is so super clear. You can have a well-functioning licensing system, you can have a fairly well-functioning licensing system, and you can have a monopoly. And if we look now in Norway and Finland, they have a channelization of less than 50%. So more than half of the gambling market in Finland and in Norway is right now gray or black. Whereas in Sweden, in a fairly well-functioning licensing system, the channelization is 75, and as we heard from Morten previously, a well-functioning licensing system is plus 90. And that is why it's important that Denmark maintains successful. It's important not just for Denmark, it's actually important for the whole of Europe, because we need that beacon of light to show that you can have a licensing system with a high ambition of consumer protection reaching that level. And I mean Austria, with a leakage of 60%. What is the attitude among political stakeholders in Austria towards consumers that are in need of consumer protection when you have a leakage of 60%? What about Austrian consumers? Do they not have the right to receive the consumer protection that is offered within a licensing system?
I mean, it's devastating, really. It's, as you said, it's really devastating. The only, and to be honest, we have a monitoring entity, we have authorities who are giving out licenses, but they don't care. I mean, nobody, all of these operators, they don't receive fines or sanctions. The only thing which is currently running against operators is the player claims, yeah, which is a big burden, to be honest, for operators. But there's no cases against players who play on foreign sites which have no licenses. Yeah, it's a tiger without any teeth.
Right. I think we have another 3 minutes left. We started with a short delay. Boss, 5 minutes? Oh, that's very gracious. Thank you very much. So then I can slow down a little bit. You raised the point of player claims. I just want to give you some information. It's in these countries where operators were serving customers without a license when there was a monopoly or a total prohibition of private activities in the gambling sector. Germany, Austria, good examples, same in the Netherlands and maybe other jurisdictions. And players' argument is all these contracts, all these agreements between the player and the casino operator were null and void because they were infringing the law. And so we have to get back our losses. That's what the player says. And there are many courts, civil courts in these countries who are confirming this legal opinion, this legal view being right, being correct. And so players get this money. And we're talking about a few €100, but sometimes it's $1 million or even more per player if it runs with sports betting, for instance. And now there's pending cases at the European Court of Justice. One case is a German case. Honestly, it's a Maltese case because forwarded by a Maltese judge. Another one by the highest German court, the Bundesgerichtshof, is pending, and a few, I would say, district courts as well, discussing whether the German regulation was in line with the freedom of services, so higher ranking European Union law. We're expecting first decisions maybe by the end of this year. If the court confirms the current civil legal assessment that they can reclaim the losses, it would be a disaster. We're talking about billions coming back to this industry, going back for 10 years maybe. The termination always starts with the player has knowledge that it was against the law, and the player had no knowledge at all. If the judge asked him, I had no idea, and now termination starts. No, that's one problem. If the court is telling us, no, Germany and Austrian regulation was an infringement of this European freedom of services, then it's game over and we're getting back to normal. So this is interesting to see what's going on over the next couple of years or months. In Sweden, players start to claim losses, but I think the courts didn't accept it, or what's the situation there?
Well, we have seen a few examples, not at all like the numerous examples as in Austria and in Germany. And the players have not been successful in claiming back the money. So I'm not really concerned about that in the Nordics in general. Why? Well, one thing that we should bear in mind is that prior to the Swedish re-regulation, so that should be stated as well, that those claims, they usually origin from before a jurisdiction was an open license market, and in a Swedish context, the EU Commission decided just before the re-regulation of the Swedish gambling market that Sweden as a state infringed fundamental freedoms within the European Union. And for that reason, I don't expect that Swedish courts want to dig into that mud again, because the result may very well be that it was not the operators that infringed law, But in fact,
state liability.
yeah, exactly.
Interesting point. Right. Are there any questions from the audience? Now is the opportunity. Yes, please.
First of all, thank you for the panel. It was very interesting to listen to such a high-level overview of European gambling issues. Just want to clarify one point. I'm not an expert in German or Austrian tax law, but you mentioned the model right now is, you refer to it as schizophrenic. Somehow illegal gambling websites penetrate the German and Austrian markets, but somehow they are taxed, I understand. How does that taxation happen? Is it?
Yeah.
Mr. Freud will answer this question.
Yeah, super. No, to be honest, really, it's schizophrenic. Yeah, in Austria is I think the only country in Austria, or maybe worldwide, where you say betting is not the same like gambling. Yeah, betting is something different. Yeah, we have It's a historical approach in Austria, to be honest. Yeah, we had these greyhound races and horse races, and the legislator gave that back in history 100 years ago. Gave that to the provinces to earn some money, to get some taxes. Yeah? And that stayed with the Austrian provinces. So we have 9 provinces, and each and any province can give out licenses for betting. Yeah? And obviously with the time of digitalization, betting remained with the provinces, but also online betting. Yeah? So whenever you offer into Austria an online, as an operator, online betting, you could apply for an Austrian license in the provinces. There's no limitation in numbers, you get the license even. But you need a certain tangible point where you really have your server, where it's your seat. When you don't have this, there's no tangible point, and you cannot even fall under regulation in Austria. So you're totally free. If you're from Malta, if you're from Lithuania, offering into Austria with no tangible point in Austria, you don't need an Austrian license, and you're free to offer betting products, online betting product in Austria. So everybody can offer this, no sanction, no fines, that's totally fine, also with case law supported in Austria, and it's not even falling under the player claims. So because that's a legal offering, taking into consideration the European freedoms, offering from another country into Austria. So that's rather factually a very liberal approach. On the other hand, we have gambling, a gambling monopoly, and if you offer an online casino product, poker, this is considered as gambling, falls under the monopoly, and if you offer this from wherever, from Europe or from the Caribbean islands, then you fall under the obligation to have a national license, and then you're even subject to these player claims. And the consequences are enormous.
Right. You don't have to understand this. I think not even the Austrians understand
No,
this.
it's super complicated, and it's a white label. It's a nice sign for those who want to offer betting. Yeah, and you pay betting tax, by the way. Yeah.
1 second.
Yeah,
maybe 2.
I think any jurisdiction, there is only one possible way to tax gambling, namely by gross gambling revenue. Some jurisdictions, they use revenue as the basis for taxation. That is a guaranteed way to the catastrophe. You will face channelization challenges if you use that taxation method. Gross gambling revenue, namely that you first pay, you exclude the taxation from the winnings that you pay back to the players, and you only tax the amount of money that the gambling operator actually holds, is the only possibility to kind of introducing and work with a functioning taxation method.
That's very important, and Germany is proving evidence because our tax base is stakes, and you see what's going on.
Did we answer your question?
Not fully. So, for example, you're an operator in Malta offering betting services to Austrian customers.
Right.
So you get taxed in Malta unless you disclose that you provide your
Austrian...
Which is usually...
Yeah, but the Austrian financial unit would consider all customers' point of consumption in Austria as Austrian, but that's the pot where they take the taxes from. So they argue that this is not a double taxation. They just tax the consumers coming from Austria. They track them with IP tracking, whatever, or at least they believe what you say. Well, my estimation on Austrian customers is this and that. And the betting tax in Austria is a self-declaratory tax. So every month you show the numbers to the authority, to the financial unit, and they say yes or no, or you challenge it. But actually, it's working. In a way, it's schizophrenic, but it's working. Yeah.
Yes, and even not declaring your taxes is under criminal law tax evasion, of course, which is a risk. So, as we can conclude, shifting from monopoly to a regulated system with private operators, it's not easy. Probably it's easier to start from scratch. Therefore, I suggest that we establish a new licensing regime in the independent state of Usupi, across the river here, with a new regulatory and licensing regime, considering all the do's and don'ts of other states, and make it better. If you agree, we'll see you in the old town later and start working on it. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your contribution. That was marvelous. Thank you.